We must search for what is truth.
You doubt me?
Seek truth.
What is truth? And what is God?
The first duty is to the truth, whether it's scientific truth, or historical truth, or personal truth.
Then here is the proof you seek.
You don't really want an answer to that question.
Welcome to the AxPx podcast, honest conversations about faith, doubt, disbelief, and everything in between. I am your host, Sean DeRager. It's been about a year since the last podcast. I've missed you guys. I've missed doing this. I've missed thinking about these types of subjects. So I'm hoping I ease right back into this. Got a great show lined up for you today. We are discussing something by the name of Second Naïveté. I have a couple people lined up to talk to. First, we'll be talking to Michael Hardin. We'll be talking to him about a writing that he did called The Second Naïveté. And then I'm also going to be talking to Margaret Placentra Johnston. She has something that she's wrote called The Spiritual Development Theory in Everyday Language. So I'm excited to talk to these two people who are versed in this subject and have been thinking about it and writing about it. And then afterwards, Rob Davis is going to be joining me, and him and I will be discussing our thoughts on what's called the Second Naïveté. As you're listening to the show, if any questions come up or you have anything you want to discuss as you're listening, feel free to hit me up on Twitter at the AxPx. I would love to discuss this stuff with you as you're listening. If you enjoy these conversations today, you can hear them in their entirety and uncut. You can become a patron over at Patreon. Go to patreon.com/theAxPx, and only $1 a month will unlock access to all these interviews and all these conversations completely uncut. And I'm hoping that's a really cool resource for you as you start exploring some of these topics. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. Let's get right into it. Michael Hardin is the author of The Jesus-Driven Life and the founder of PreachingPeace.org, alongside his wife, Lorri Hardin. Michael, thank you for joining us on the AxPx podcast.
Thank you, Sean.
The Clarion Journal of Spirituality and Justice published an excerpt from your, quote, primer on hermeneutics, unquote, called The Second Naïveté. Now, I've heard this term discussed before, and you use the model of the 5 stages of grief to help explain the emotional states that occur during the process of shifting from what you call the first naïveté to the second naïveté. Can you go ahead and bring our listeners through this?
From first naivete, you go to critical distance, and then you go to second naivete. It's a 3-step process. I first discovered this reading Paul Ricœur back in the 1980s. I was in Chicago at the time in seminary, and I don't recall how I found Ricœur, but at any rate, I read everything that I could find on him or by him, rather, and then on him. And it's Ricœur that argues that philosophy has come through these 3 stages of first naivete, where we just believe what the gods say or believe what the church says or mythology. Then we move into critical distance. This is kind of like the Enlightenment. We're moving out of this archaic or medieval mentality where we submit to this arbitrary divine authority. We begin to reason for ourselves. You think of Kant's great dictum, dare to think, the whole project of the Enlightenment with the 2 great mortal enemies, Voltaire and Rousseau, now sowing their seeds that we're just harvesting here in the 21st century. Holy cow. It's an amazing journey. And you move from this critical distance where the human reason is the primary arbitrator to kind of what Ricœur now calls a second naivete, where you're able to engage mythology as these expanded symbols, but that are actually communicating the transcendent. He has a whole thing around this. I mean, it's an amazing philosophy. But what I did was I began to see it in terms of the shift from what I do. You're exactly right. What I went through as an early fundamentalist evangelical when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, to discovering the historical critical method and critical theology in around 1977. And then what that did to me and where it left me, particularly as a pastor in the early 90s, I was caught between two worlds. This mythological God says that I believe that settles it world of First Naïveté, and also this world of critical distance where I had a million questions about the Bible and theology and everything else. And I could not put everything together. I just couldn't do it. And I crashed and burned in the ministry as a result. I thought that was terrible. And I found since that this break from evangelicalism has actually, I've had a number of folks share with me that it's actually sent them to choose psychiatric care. In other words, to commit themselves because the break was so intense. And that got me really to thinking about the investment that we make emotionally in our worldviews, the investment that we make in authority, what it means to radically break from that, the intense fear that one first feels when one breaks from that, because now one is on one's own, and there is no divine transcendent authority telling one how to live. So it's kind of like, ooh. But then, if one begins criticizing everything, and pretty soon one is looking at Christianity going, fake news, just tweeting out 140 characters in the middle of the night or something. Yes, there was no pun intended there, or was there? At any rate, you have this shift, and then people dwell there. They go read John Spong, they read Bart Ehrman, they read these Jesus seminar, Jesus historians, and they, in other words, instead of going to the Christian bookstore and reading fundamentalist literature, they go to Barnes and Noble and they read this hyper speculative literature, and honest to God, they think that's real scholarship. And then they're comfortable out there in this desert land where they have no spirituality, no real hold on life. They have nothing. They're frustrated. They're upset. They're angry. They're bored, but they won't move. They think that the only shift they have to make is from this fundamentalism to this, like, I'm a human being, I'm rational, I don't need to believe in God, that's all bullshit kind of thing. They never see the importance of becoming a whole person again. In other words, they're treating what should be a road as a rest stop. That's where essentially liberal Christianity has ended up pretty much. Progressive Christianity is really struggling. It's in our country, and I'm speaking only about America right now when I use evangelical fundamentalist or anything. I'm only talking about America. But progressive Christianity is, again, you when you attend a progressive Christian church, what do you walk away? Everything's a mystery. And so, okay, great, at some point there has to be something. And so we have to ask much deeper questions than we're already asking about the relationship of this journey that we take. It's a liberating journey all the way. And we can, whenever we find ourselves stuck, at that point we need to say, this is not where I should be. I need to move on. It's just like the grieving process. When you lose somebody you love, first thing you do is you go immediately numb. You might as well have drunk a bottle of Jack Daniels, because at that point you can't feel anything, because if you do, you'll die. And that's how it feels when you first lose your faith. It's just like you're afraid you're going to die. You're going to burn in hell, all that, the kind of stuff that goes with that. And then you move to denial. Then of course you've got anger, and then you've got bargaining. I mean, and all these stages are mixed up. They're not linear. They're fluid. But at some point, one looks at one's life and says, I only have a choice. I can either be in a rut or I can be in a groove. And it's all about how I treat it. And so you make that choice to move again and to move forward.
when does the second naivete come into play? Is it in conjunction with acceptance, or is that just kind of the catalyst that moves you into the second naivete?
The first time it's going to happen is when you've broken from first naivete. So you move into acceptance. The critical distance is where you're at. You're no longer in the church. You're no longer a Bible-believing, Bible-thumping, fundamentalist, evangelical, charismaniac. You're not in the crazy world anymore. You accept that. But if you remain there the rest of your life without recognizing, okay, so now I'm here, but what else is out there? If you don't make that move, you'll never, like I said, you'll just end up bored. You'll end up frustrated. You'll end up kind of, the French have a term that I think really applies to an awful lot of liberal spirituality, and the term is ennui. And it means total boredom. But if you can imagine driving into a cul-de-sac or a dead end, and then just driving in circles around the dead end trying to go, how do I get out? How do I get out? How do I get out? You know what I mean? That's ennui. And that's a lot of liberal Christian experience out there right now. The fundamentalists, on the other hand, they're zealots. And the evangelicals, they're hardcore believers that God is a vampire. God's sacrificial. God wants blood. Their God is two-faced, and that's what we've left behind. And so we've just got to keep moving forward. Here's the key for me is when you leave critical distance and come into second naivete, the first thing is that the ability to hold faith and reason together is to recognize that they have two completely different functions in life. They really do. Reason has to do with the ego. Faith has to do with the deeper self. This is something most people just simply do not get, because what they try to do is toss reason and replace it with faith, or they try to reason their way to faith, and neither can be done. The tossing of reason and just blindly believing is absurd. I mean, that's essentially being a zombie. You might as well just toss your brains. And that's why I tell people, well, if the zombie apocalypse ever happens, Christians will be the only ones to survive, because zombies are looking for brains, So the other thing is, you try to reason yourself to faith. That's impossible. Mm-hmm. It's just absolutely impossible. If, in fact, what most religious traditions assert in one form or another is that faith comes by revelation. It's God's act. God creates the encounter. God creates the reality. God creates the relationship, and that relational reality that one experiences is termed as one of faith. So I think it's important to have these distinctions in mind as one is thinking through these things. But again, I do think that the universe, or God, is, for me, of course, as a Christian, that's the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. But however you choose to identify transcendence, I think the beautiful thing is the universe does listen to the heart that seeks truth and love and life and light. That one doesn't have to be a specific religion in order for God or the transcendent or the universe, however you choose to identify the source of reality, to respond. I am absolutely persuaded now, at almost 60 years old, that the universe loves love, mm-hmm. and loves light and loves peace. And our task is not to try to figure out why there's evil in the world, and our task is to continue to sow the seeds of love, because they will bloom, or as Rob Bell said, love wins. And that is the gospel. End of story. Love does win.
So you have a website or an organization called Preaching Peace, and you guys are gearing up for something called the Gospel of Peace and the Peace of the Gospel in November. And so tell me a little bit about preachingpeace.org, and then the things that you guys have going on there.
Yeah, Preaching Peace was a nonprofit that Lorri and I, my wife and I, began back in 2007. We had been working on the website since about late 2002, where I was just writing commentary for clergy from the perspective of mimetic theory and peacemaking, René Girard's mimetic theory, and Anabaptist kind of peacemaking approaches. And we started running events and publishing books, and I began speaking tours around the U.S. Eventually, that led to a long international tour in 2012, 5 months on the road in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. And we've just grown. We've been a mom and pop shop until this year, and this year we're about to hire 6 employees if all goes well. This is where I really wished I was a Calvinist, Sean. I really wish I could pray to a Deus ex machina. Come, bless me, make me rich, you filthy bastard in the sky. Something like that. Sorry.
Yes.
I hope that's not offensive.
Not at all. Not at all.
But we've 2 new endeavors in addition to preaching peace and all the things we do there with our videos and podcasts and everything else. We have our first major big conference. We've rented out the Santa Fe Convention Center in New Mexico this November 2nd through 4th. And what I did was I sat down and I said, who do I know that the best of the best that I can bring? And I wrote all these invitations out, and we had a few no's, and that was expected. But man, the lineup for that thing: Richard Rohr, Brian McLaren, Doug Campbell, Stan Hauerwas, Nadia Boltz-Weber, Danielle Schroer, Diana Butler Bass. Did I say Doug Campbell, Stan Hauerwas? Who else? I mean, it's an incredible lineup. It's incredible. And then there are breakout session speakers, about 20 of them. And almost I'm going to guess a good 2/3 of the contributors, are masters or PhD level. They're experts in their field. We've got great music. We've got the many. They're a fantastic, most intriguing progressive Christian artist. They incorporate any number of liturgical type of things into their musical production. It's very good stuff. On Friday we got Dar Williams. Man, she's a phenomenal singer-songwriter. And then on Saturday, we're bringing in Gungor. Nice. And so we've got that. And then we've got the School of Peace Theology, which started here just this last week online. And we've got some tremendous, tremendous teachers that will be teaching these little 6-week courses from Pete Enns, James Allison, Robin Perry, Sharon Baker, Jamie Clark Souls, Greg Boyd, George Dunn, Sharon and Keith Putt both. Matt Hewitt will be there. Jay Phelan will be there. There's just Jonathan Sauter. There's so many great instructors in this thing. Our goal is to educate the Christian public that's sick and tired of the bullshit from Christianity and wants to engage the best possible scholarship at a level they can understand. So we're bringing these top quality scholars and we're saying, talk to our folks, teach them, essentially teach adult Sunday school for us. And then we'll add intermediate courses and advanced, and we've got Greek and Hebrew and different things, so that regular folks, if they want, can get a good, solid education rather than indoctrination.
There's a lot more resources over at preachingpeace.org. You also have a handful of books that you've written. The one that I stumbled across, and it looks like it's free since I'm a Amazon Prime Kindle reader, so I'll have to check it out. It's called The Jesus-Driven Life: Reconnecting Humanity with Jesus. So I'm excited to read that.
One theologian compared it to Luther's 95 Theses, and 2 Bonhoeffer scholars compared it to Bonhoeffer's Discipleship, written for the 21st century. Nice. It was good company to be placed with. Yeah, I was honored. Yeah.
Michael Hardin, thanks for chatting with me, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again in the near future.
Thank you, Sean.
We're talking with Margaret Placentra Johnston, and she has written a couple books, Faith Beyond Belief and RX for Spiritual Myopia. The reason why I wanted to get Margaret on the show was because I had stumbled across her spiritual development theory. Margaret, thank you so much for joining me and talking with us a little bit about this.
Thank you, Sean. I'm delighted to speak with you. Let me say there's 2 disclaimers. One is that we cannot use these stages to judge an individual. So you don't go reading about the stages and say, yeah, my mother-in-law, she's a lawless. You just don't do that. It's not fair. There's no point, nothing to be gained by that. The second disclaimer is that no one of us belongs to any one of these stages completely. It's a little bit like using the word optimist versus pessimist. Most of us have a tendency towards either optimism or pessimism, but on a given day, we might be the other one. We might be more pessimistic when we're usually an optimist. We may trend more in one direction over time, or, so no one, same thing with these stages, no one is absolutely at that faithful level. Trust that no one is 100% lawless. Having the terminology optimist versus pessimist, helps us understand something important about ourselves, and I think so do these stages. Just having the words teaches us something important without being something by which we judge people or categorize people. I like to start speaking about the stages starting with the second one, because that is the most predominant stage, or it is the way religion is portrayed in our society and at the explicit level. So when you hear about someone who has beliefs, okay, they've read the Bible or they've listened to their preacher and they believe everything they said or everything they read, that's the faithful level. And they're characterized by certain traits. They tend to be very group-oriented. In other words, they get their authority from belonging to a particular group, a religion, or it doesn't even have to be a religion. It could be their political party. But they do so in a pre-critical way, so they're just accepting the authority of what their group told them. That's sort of normal as an adolescent stage, or a pre-adolescent, but eventually you have to own your own beliefs, and that's how you mature. So the next stage beyond faithful is the rational. It's the third. I'll talk about the first one at the end. I like to save that for the end. So the second stage is faithful. The third stage is rational, and these are the people who've gone through that critical questioning stage where they've decided, they've started questioning the beliefs they were taught by their tribe, and they've decided either to own them or disown them, or decide which ones to own or disown. So we call these people critical. They're not pre-critical like the faithful. They're critical in that they have thought through these things. And then the fourth stage is I'm going to use the term unitive. In my first book, I used the word mystic, but that puts people off, I think. So the unitive stage is these people are kind of circling back. They've gone through that rational stage. They've trusted their human reason. They've, distanced themselves from group belief systems, and they become more individualized. But at the fourth level, they're sort of circling back towards some realizations that there's something connecting us all, or there's some spiritual reality, or there's some things cannot be sliced and diced up by the rules of science. There's other things going on. There's human intuition. There's, spiritual experiences, personal experiences, things like that. So they become more tolerant, more open-minded, and more, we call the word unitive, meaning that they relate to a larger part of the universe than just their tribe, not just people of a certain religion or certain race or certain political party, but at that unitive level, they sort of see everyone as being connected, including like animals and nature and even the spirit level, things we can't see and hear directly. So again, faithful, rational, unitive are the three upper stages. In order to understand the faithful stage and why they cling so tightly to those beliefs is important to understand the first level, which is the lawless. Now, apparently, I'm not a developmentalist, but apparently in early childhood, up to about age 7, it's normal to be in this lawless stage. In other words, you think it's all about you. You're very, we call it egocentric. Everything is about getting your own wants and wishes filled, and you really don't relate that much to other people. Or you relate, but you don't think of their needs or their concerns. So you are egocentric. These people, I call them lawless because they feel that the rules of society don't really apply to them. They're kind of manipulative. Their lives tend to be fairly chaotic. So I'm going to keep it brief and just go through a little summary. So when you look at the lawless level, they are egocentric, meaning that to them, it's sort of like it's all about me. That's their mantra. The faithful level is ethnocentric. It's all about my group. Okay. The rational level is is world-centric. So in other words, they relate to like everyone in the world and things we can see and feel and touch, like even animals in nature to some extent. So they're world-centric, and their mantra is like, we are the world. We are part of the whole world. And then at the unitive level, it's even more broader worldview than that. So we went from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric. What could it possibly be that the unitive level is including in their worldview that the others are not? And that is the things we can't see and hear and feel, information that comes from the spirit level, so to speak, whatever form it comes to them. There's all different possibilities. Some of them use the word God, some of them don't. Some of them say we're all connected, we all are one. Some of them don't use that terminology. But the point is they all have an appreciation of something larger than just literal beliefs, and their information comes to them from somewhere other than outside authorities. And so that unitive level is sort of corresponds in my mind to that second naivete that Paul Ricœur described.
When did you start exploring this development theory, and I guess why did it interest you?
Yeah. Why? That's a really good question. I guess I had first heard about it. I read the works of M. Scott Peck from long ago, maybe I might have read it around the 1990s, very early 90s. And he had described these stages of spirituality that he had discovered in his practice of psychotherapy. And so I was kind of, the first three stages that he spoke of made a lot of sense to me. He spoke about the lawless people who are not guided by anything but their own will. And then he spoke about, he didn't call them lawless, I'm sorry. He called them chaotic and antisocial. And then there's this second stage, which I call the faithful. And he called it, I forget what word he used, but they were people who were just kind of literal believers, and they just kind of accept everything that their pastor or the Bible tells them, in a kind of unquestioning way. And I saw that, I was brought up Catholic. I went to, I think it was 18 years of Catholic school, if you can believe that, through graduate school. And I had gone through this, just accepting everything I was taught. And then the next stage after that, the third stage that Peck described was the rational stage, where the person kind of starts questioning, they run up against some issues of what we call cognitive dissonance, where they their church is telling them one thing, and the real world out there is telling them something else. And they sort of try and reason through, do they really want to own the beliefs they hold, or they want to modify or perhaps reject them? So I was at that, flag-waving, card-carrying, rational stage. I had rejected everything I had been taught about the Catholic Church. And then I read about the fourth stage, and I about fell out of my chair. Peck was describing this other stage where people have gone through the prior stages, and then they sort of circle back around to some type of faith. And so I was astounded to learn of the existence of this type of faith. It's something like what you just mentioned, the second naivete. That's a term that comes from Paul Ricœur, who was a French philosopher, and he used the stages first naivete, and then a critical distance, which is sort of that rational stage where you kind of distance yourself from what your tribe has taught you. And then the second naivete, which is kind of that circling back to some type of faith. So anyway, I was flabbergasted to hear about this, and I just rejected it entirely for years. I mean, it's like, that's ridiculous, But then I started coming across other works by other authors also describing these same stages, but different terms and different numbers of stages, and but they're all pointing in the same direction towards this more unified type of faith. It's not so literal, but accepting of some type of spiritual reality. So, I just let that sit for many years. I'm just sort of stewing about this. Do I believe it? Do I not believe it? Is this second naivete thing possible? Is this fourth stage really possible? And the more I read, the more I found all these different authors that all said the same thing. And I don't know where you stand politically, but for me, the election of 2004 drove me up a wall. That faithful level was just, like the religious right. They were just being so divisive and so hateful and so, righteous, and we're right and everyone else is wrong. And if you're not a Christian, you can't be a good person. And I just got so fed up. I said, someone has got to set this record straight. So I had just at the time sold my professional practice. By profession, I'm an optometrist. And my children had gone off to college, and my responsibility level went from breakneck crazy to, very easy. And I thought, well, I have the time, I have the knowledge, I have the writing skills. I will write this book that kind of, to lay out these stages in terminology that the average person could understand. Because if you try to read Paul Ricœur, well, good luck. It's really complex. And then another one of the theorists that I refer to is James Fowler. I mean, brilliant work that he did, but it took me 10 years to understand that book. I mean, to give you some idea how, it doesn't correlate with most people's everyday experience, but as soon as you understand what he's saying, it's like, oh, of course. So that's how I got interested in, and it was just through happenstance that I kept running across these books. I guess it was happenstance, or maybe it wasn't. But, and I suddenly felt called. I felt it's my job to write something that will, sort of modify these strident voices of that faithful level that are actually harmful. They're creating harm in our society today. And so I'm trying to just modify those voices.
If you're listening, you want to dive more into this, go to mpjauthor.com. There's a link right there that says Spiritual Development Concept. It's a really great thing to kind of look through and read through. Your book, Faith Beyond Belief, was that the first book you wrote dealing with these concepts?
Yes, that was the first book. And in that book, I used, I figured, I am not a theologian, I'm not a sociologist. So in order to gain authority for the concept I was trying to describe, I used the true real-life examples from true stories from real life people I interviewed. And I showed them going through these stages, passing from, say, faithful to rational. And then there's 4 stories like that. And then there's 6 stories of people who have sort of appropriated that unitive level and how they got there. And then I went on to describe all the theorists on whose work I had based what I was writing. Your next book, RX for Spiritual Myopia, is in the works. So that's actually not printed yet. I mean, I'm still editing it, and I'm still looking for a publisher. But
what's the idea for this book that you're working on?
The idea behind that is a little bit more broad. Than it incorporates the idea of the spiritual development theory from Faith Beyond Belief, the first book. But it's actually a bigger picture that I think most of our conventional society is particularly myopic in their spiritual views. So I'm an eye doctor, okay? Myopia means nearsightedness. So people are focused too much on their own, little experience, and they don't appropriate spiritual information that comes from a larger context. So looking at the larger context, we have to realize that over time things have been changing. Through globalization and the internet and all that, we're all connected to people of all different nationalities and all different religions. Information about religion has become extremely democratized. You can look up any religion you want and study it with a click of a mouse. You probably have someone next door to you who's not of your same religion or not of your same nationality. So we're being exposed to all these different perspectives, and therefore remaining in our provincial, isolated, religions, seeing that as the only spiritual truth there is very, very myopic, I feel. And I think we need to open up our understandings to something more broad. And kind of that's what that book is about.
What would your advice be to someone who is starting to search, trying to look outside their social or their religious circle? What would your advice be to somebody who's kind of starting to get in a searching mode?
I would go out and talk to people from different cultures and different religions and just see how they line up with what you believe. If you don't have people like that available, just go on the internet and click, Hindus or Buddhists or whatever. You'll find plenty of people to talk to or blogs to read or whatever. But it's in comparing, that all these cultures have these religious things that you start to realize, whoa, there can't be just one right religion. I mean, what would be the chances if there were only one right religion? When you think about it, down through all the ages and all the different religions there, what are the chances that you would have been born into the right one? Mm-hmm. The only right one? The chance is not high, right? So we got to start looking for bigger answers.
Margaret, thank you so much for talking to me about these ideas and in your books. You can, again, mpjauthor.com is Margaret's website, and there's a lot of great information on there. Check that out, and check out her book, which is currently available, called Faith Beyond Belief. Margaret, thanks again for joining me.
Thanks, Sean. It was enjoyable speaking with you. Thanks so much.
So for this portion of the episode, Rob Davis has joined me. And Rob, you were actually on the last podcast episode over a year ago. So we ended with you and we're starting with you again.
Nice.
So
privileged.
You should. You really should. So when I threw out the idea that I was going to, for some reason, start up this podcast again and start using this dusty portion of my brain, you threw out some suggestions, and one of them was this thing called Second Naïveté. So I'm wondering why this was one of the first things that kind of popped up for us to chat about.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely not an expert in that topic, and
Mm-hmm.
I've read all kinds of different perspectives on what that means and different ways that people have approached that. Including the two people that you interviewed, and then also some others like Richard Rohr and, even somebody like Ken Wilber. Just a lot of different people kind of generally talking about the same thing. And I mean, my understanding being, everyone goes through general kind of stages or phases in their quote unquote spiritual life or spirituality. And I think just, being out of the church now for, how long? Over 7 years. I've definitely, I feel like I've come to that point of like a second naivete of, I find a lot of things about religion and theology, spirituality really interesting, but I have literally zero, vested interest in any of it, which is a really weird place to be. So what I think I've seen is, a lot of the people that I've known over the years who have walked away from the church, they're kind of in a really similar place where, you've gone through those stages of grief of, letting everything go and really, kind of giving that whole thing a proper burial, and then kind of moving on. And, some of my friends I think are still in kind of I don't know the right language to use about this.
And that's fine. And that's, and that's why I wanted to kind of open up with these, basically like theologian and scholars, right? And give us the almost high level description, right? But then you and I can lay down the bullshit, how we interpret all that.
Yeah. And it's really hard to not, not be condescending whenever you're talking about either people who are still kind of in, a, fundamentalist church, or even a more kind of evangelical thing. 'Cause, being out of it for so long, there's so many things that we all experience that we know were unhealthy and all those things. And so trying to be empathetic and not judge people, but also be like honest about, this is really not good for you. It's not good for your family. It's not good for, humanity, for these things to continue the way they are. I feel like I'm learning how to deal with that. Especially with family members and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've talked about this before with my own journey. And it's funny because I'm trying to think. I tried to listen to the last time you and I talked, and I was like, I hope we don't tread similar grounds. If we do, that's fine. But I think in this context, it's good to kind of reiterate like where we've been. And when I basically walked away from my upbringing of Christianity, it was and just what Michael Hardin had described. Like you go through this extreme, almost depression because you've given everything up that you knew. And it took me a while because I think everyone has to go through it. You have to kind of purge all this stuff. You have to be angry. And I think it's all part of that process. But if you don't allow yourself to move through these steps and know, if you don't know what you're thinking or if you don't know what you're looking for, then it can get very frustrating and very confusing. And you can be in this one path for a very long time, which I feel like I feel like a couple of years. Anytime my wife brought up religion, anytime anyone brought up religion, I would just almost, my eyes would glaze over and I just wouldn't even want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I would have like an anger, and I would almost want to come back with some sarcastic remark and kind of burn their bridge or burn their belief down by some smart ass remark or something like that. And for a while, I feel like that is healthy, but you have to be able to move yourself past that and in through these steps and understand. And I think if I would have had an understanding and of these steps, I think I probably would have been a little more of a healthy transition. But now I'm still very critical to organized religion. But yeah, there's that part of my brain that I can't turn off, that I'm always thinking about it. I'm always thinking about spirituality and things. I'm thinking about, who God is, what God is, and where I find what I believe to be God in my life. And it's a whole different, it's a whole different scenario than before I threw away my faith. And it's a different scenario from when I was kind of fine with not having any faith at all.
Right.
If that makes any sense. But I think a lot of people are stuck in that anger, and they almost turn into a fundamentalist in their own right, trying to get people to come not down to their level. That's the wrong thing to say, but to meet them face to face and kind of tear down their belief. And you almost you go through that where you want people to just trash what they believe and just understand what you're trying to say.
Right. Yeah. And even, I've definitely been through that phase of I don't believe in God and you shouldn't either. And it's like, well, that's, it's like your opinion, man. It's just like, there's, no, of all the theology and philosophy that I've studied, no one has an objective answer to that kind of question. So we're all in the area of speculation, and to really hedge your bets on whether God exists or God doesn't, or what God is or who God is, or what God is like, or whatever, seems a bit, I don't know, immature to me. It's a really important and interesting question, but, yeah, if the fundamentalists aren't right, then, there's a lot of conversation to be had rather than, anyone, kind of owning the answer to those kinds of questions. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel like more and more people are being open and honest about these conversations and kind of going through this. I actually went out for drinks with a couple that I had met in an older church that I had gone to. And, their wife had really helped my wife, through a really hard time with some postpartum depression. So it was almost like we needed to be in that church at the time. We met them, really helped my wife, and we've become, pretty good friends. But with everything, I kind of, backed off a little bit because I knew them from the church. And we actually went out for drinks with them the other night and had a blast. And we're able to talk with them openly and honestly. My wife is now having some frustrations with the church and Western organized religion, and she's kind of seeing the seams, the seams are showing on the church services and things like that. So she's having some things that she needs to talk out. She's like almost going through this. She's dealing with it a lot better than I did, that's for sure. But the fact that we were able to sit down, order a couple old fashions, and the ladies had some really good wine, and we had a few too many, and we were able to talk about all this stuff was huge. It was almost like therapeutic for me, like something that I needed a long time, because I had distanced myself from them and didn't really want to talk to them about this stuff, because I was like, oh, they're involved in the church. They're going to be very defensive because it's something that they deal with every single day, and the people, but they voice like the same kind of frustrations, and they were very sympathetic to where my wife and I are at, and like that was huge. So it's almost like if you don't, and they'd kind of known what I've been going through just off like Facebook posts and things like that, but they had never approached me. I don't know why. It just kind of worked out where they finally, our paths are kind of crossing again. So, I mean, if you're not open and honest about what you're feeling, you may never run into somebody or have these conversations, and it was really cool. And I don't, and they're still involved in that church. They see the faults in it, but they're connected with the people. And I think that they're hoping that their transparency will hopefully help others that are kind of going through the same frustrations. But I would have never known that if I would have just kept distancing myself and not wanting to talk with someone that I knew from, I guess my Christian past.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really hard. I mean, especially like we still live in the city where I was a, staff deacon of a pretty large church here. So I knew a couple thousand people by name. So you randomly run into people, and one of the more difficult parts of kind of walking away from that was the lack of those people who really reached out and tried to figure out what happened, why I left, all of that. So that, I think that was a part of that grieving process was like, man, I used to know all these people, and now like I don't communicate with any of them. And when I run into them, it's super awkward, and they don't even ask what happened. Like they probably assume the worst. And,
there's that Satan worshiping Rob. He's probably going to buy himself some goat blood.
Right. Yeah. Like it's weird. So, now being kind of 7 years removed from that, it's definitely just kind of accepted it. But I wish that more kind of evangelical, conservative-ish churches could find a way to not, just not do that to people when they start having questions, when they walk away, that, people would still, at least remain friends and, stay in contact with people. Even, not like the whole bait and switch thing, but just to know, like, hey, this is going to be really hard on them to walk away. I should really be there as a friend and, see how they're doing. Yeah.
Well, one interesting example, I mean, I've seen this on sides of even just standard grief. When my brother-in-law passed away, I mean, it's been 10 years. The wound is still there with my wife's family. It's a tough subject, which is, which I get. And when that happened, when he passed away, it totally caused like this rift within her family. Like, people didn't come around anymore because they just didn't know how to even talk to my in-laws, and they didn't know how to bring it up, and they just distanced themselves. And it's been 10 years and they're still distant. And it's like, if they would just open up and just be there and be loving and friends and be there when my mother-in-law or my father-in-law just break down and cry off of one, my father-in-law will see a cookie or a candy that reminds him of his son, and he'll just break down. It's fine. But people for some reason don't know how to handle that, and they just kind of back off. And I don't know how, I don't know if it's a society thing. I don't know. But so seeing that it happens in kind of a secular arena with something like death and families and things like that, you think about it in the church context, it makes sense. Where I'm assuming people just don't know how to even approach it. Maybe they think that you're going to get angry. Maybe they think that, maybe they think you don't want to be around them. They take it personally. So, I always made it a point whenever I saw people who I knew from the church and everything to just smile and ask them how they're doing, and, and just let them know that I'm all right, just by having a casual and open conversation and not, it's almost like we're the ones kind of going through this shit, but we almost have to be the ones to kind of bridge the gap in a way with everyone. It's weird. It's something that I think about all the time, and on how people react. I don't know what causes it. I think it's just people not knowing what to say. And I think most people don't even realize they're doing it, or just kind of, blind or numb to what they're doing. But then like nobody wants to talk about it, Right. Even with my own things with my wife's family, it's like, if everyone would just get in a room for an hour and air all this out, like, there would be some healing there if you just communicate. But, we're going on 10 years and it's just, a lot of backroom talk, about everyone else.
Yeah, totally. And, I'm sure that, I think I've done this podcast with you a few times now, but I'm sure I've brought this up at some point. But, over time, I feel like it's becoming more and more difficult to know where to draw the line between a cult and a church. And
yeah,
I mean, maybe, in any group, there are cult-like tendencies, and there are things that, individuals do that is very manipulative and all that. But, yeah, I'm having a really hard time trying to figure out like, okay, I know some very specific things are indicative of a cult, and, but outside of that, it's just, people being people and being lame and like, and, I don't know. I just feel like, man, if I could go back 15 years when I kind of started down the path of, working in churches and being involved in all of that, I feel like something I would say, knowing what I know now is like, it's like, hey, you all need to accept right now that over half of these people in this room are not going to be involved in this in the next 5 to 10 years. You need to just deal with that now. And how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to prepare for that? What are you going to do for the people that think that what we're doing here is just terrible and a waste of time and wrong and everything else? Like, how are you going to react to that? Because if a church is supposed to be about loving and caring and taking care of people and all of that, how are you going to love those people as they leave? And I'm assuming that very few churches are having those kinds of conversations, but that's just the reality. Like, that's the world we live in, that, people are leaving churches in droves, and there's not really a lot to help them kind of through that process.
Yeah. And I think there needs to be more, writings about this, or at least, I don't know, like, my frustration is when I see someone, have an epiphany about something, they quickly form another group, that is perpetuating this, and, or some nonprofit or something like that. But I think that's all good, but, I feel like the internet and, Facebook and all this stuff is in a way, it's a double-edged sword, like, it can hurt and it can help. And we're living in an age where, you can fact check your preacher during the sermon. We saw that during the recent debates, we're fact checking, Orange Von Trump as he's talking, and 90% of it is just total bullshit. But for some reason, like, there's this old model that we're, churches and people just keep spouting out the stuff, and they don't, I don't know if they realize it or not, but I don't know. I guess if we're just open and honest with each other and listen to each other, we're fine. We'll be fine. But nobody wants to. There's still the walls that are up. And, just what I did, just going out and hanging out with somebody who I thought believed differently. And we still do. But it's people don't know how to talk to others and converse and fellowship with others with different beliefs. Everyone wants to just find the person that believes almost exactly what they believe and go hang out with them. And you see that when people leave the church, they try to find other people at the church who are angry at the church. They start something over here and they all talk and then another group finds, start studying like hermeneutics and Paul Ricœur and all this stuff, and they'll go over here and they'll create their thing. I guess it's all about being approachable. I'm rambling, but it's about, I guess, being approachable with this stuff.
Yeah,
I
totally.
I get overwhelmed, like when we were, going back to the Second Naïveté, when I was starting to read those links that you sent me and everything. I was like, holy shit, like, this is just, like, a lot of it's over my head. It's good, but it's some, pretty, you gotta do some heavy lifting to kind of understand it. And, what I liked about when I talked to Margaret, she was able to kind of bring it down to kind of the everyday level a little bit. But, but you still have to be in that mindset, to kind of be thinking about all this.
Right.
But,
yeah. And what's funny, all the years that I spent kind of reading philosophy, like I would try to read, someone like Paul Ricœur, who's a French philosopher. Mm-hmm. So you're already reading like a translation, and it's this super obscure language, and I think intentionally to some degree obscure. So you've got to find like an interpreter, and then even the interpreter is hard to understand. Like, so, I really appreciate people like her and someone like Richard Rohr, who can take these really abstract, ideas that, are worth the effort of trying to understand them, and they're, complicated, and there's all these, caveats to everything. But being able to kind of take all that and bring it down a level to someone like me who, one, I just don't have the patience for it anymore. Like, I'm not going to go read Derrida, which I did, 5 or 6 years ago, thought it was the most amazing thing ever. And now I'm like, man, I don't understand that paragraph, and I'm over it. Like,
well, I'll do that. I'll try to read something, and then I get interrupted by the kids, and I'm trying to, then I go back to try to reading it, and then I get interrupted again. And after a while, I'm just like, I'm not in the space to do this. Right. Maybe when I'm older, I'll have more time, and that's cool. Like, I'm totally welcome to that. And I think that's the point of the second naivete, is when you're kind of done chasing it so quickly. You know what I mean? Like, you're patient with having answers come to you, or maybe not even come at all, but you're in the headspace or in the mind space where you're okay either way. There's not this ticking time bomb. There's not, you don't have to figure it all out. And I think I'm finally at that place where I'm willing to research stuff, but now's not that time. I can't sit down and read Paul Ricœur right now.
Right.
I just know I don't even know if I'm gonna have time to read some of these links that you sent me that I'm putting in the show notes, by the way. But like, I want to read Margaret Placentra Johnston's book, and then I want to read her new book, and then I want to read, Michael Hardin's book, his books, which seem more approachable. But even those, I'm like, I need to find the time, but I need to not stress about it and be like, I'm there. I have them in a stack right here. I'm gonna get to them, but I just need to kind of, know that there's no rush. Right. And if I never figure out, I never figure it out.
Yeah. And I think, that, something that I wish some people would have told me when I was younger, that it's really, I think, a sign of maturity that you kind of know yourself when, everything isn't an emergency and everything isn't urgent, and like, someone hands you a book. It's not like, oh my God, I have to read this right now. And then once you start reading it, it's like, oh, this changes everything. And I'm going to pull a Shane Claiborne and move into a commune. And like, so like all those things, like there's so many books and lectures and TED Talks and sermons and everything else that could, kind of push you in a very different direction, when I think a sign of maturity is like, okay, like that's a really interesting perspective. I'm going to sit on that for an indefinite amount of time. And you have to live your life. So, you have commitments, and you have family and work and all these other things. One thing should not, completely uproot you. That's just really, right. That stupid verse. Sorry, it's not stupid. I probably just offended somebody. That verse about, every wind of doctrine or whatever, just like throwing you off. Like, that just seems, I remember being in that place where it was just like, I have so many questions. I have to get answers to every single question. And it's just, this endless, I don't know, the best analogy, which, may not be appropriate for this podcast. I'm not sure, but it's to me kind of like, getting older and being married for almost 18 years. Like the difference between like masturbation and making love. Like, like to me, all my theology was just beating off. Like I gotta get this done right now and just get it over with. Versus like, oh, well, this may take an hour rather than like 30 seconds. So, I
That's
don't know
the
if that
perfect analogy. That's perfect. That's fantastic.
You're welcome.
We need to think of a provocative book title and write a book.
Yeah. I'll think about that one.
Going through spiritual masturbation and moving towards spiritual making love.
Yes.
I don't know.
No. I'm sure Rob.
Then we need to add like a colon, and then we need to add like a sentence afterwards of to let everyone know what the title means.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely. And I don't have any idea how old you are, but I'm 36.
I'm 39.
Oh, okay.
The big 4-0 this year, everybody.
Nice. Yeah, like, I don't know. I feel like the third, like, now that I look back at my 20s, I'm like, well, that was fun. That was exciting. That was, new. And I was passionate and whatever. And now in my 30s, I feel like I'm just going to chill and, take things as they come. And I have plans and I have goals and all of that, but I'm not so anxious and stressed out and like everything's gonna like one little thing is gonna like push me over the edge. And that, I don't know, to me, that's a much better place to be.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I guess, as we kind of wind down here, I think the whole point of I guess this conversation and this podcast is like, if you're in a spot where you're feeling pressure, if you're feeling, depression, if you've recently changed your belief system, or if you've thrown a belief system out the window, just kind of put it in your mind that things will get better, and it may feel like your whole world is collapsing right now. You're losing friends left and right. You don't know who to talk to. Just know that a lot of us have been there, and a lot of us have gone through it. And there is, in a sense, a light at the end of the tunnel. And you can kind of go through this, and don't let like anger and bitterness, I guess, stay with you. Find a way to purge all that out of your system, which is good. And so I started this whole podcast, was to purge this shit out of my system that was kind of like coming to the surface, and it was negatively affecting my marriage, my friends, because I would take it out on my wife, who had a different belief system than me, and I was trying to sort through all this stuff, and she couldn't understand it. So find a way to get this stuff purged, and know and have patience. Just kind of allow yourself to go through it. And if you feel like there's a timeline to get things done and to figure things out, you need to throw that out as soon as possible, and just kind of almost enjoy the journey and enjoy the process, and track down as many different viewpoints as you can, and those will help you kind of formulate where you want to be, or where you want to go.
Yeah, totally. I feel like, just, my advice, I guess, would be, let all of that happen, and find, a couple people, a small group of people to kind of process those things with. Definitely, I would not encourage anyone to go out on that journey by themselves.
Yeah.
It's very isolating, and for certain people, they just can't handle it, and so it becomes deadly for certain people. So I would find some good books, find some good people who will listen and let you process all your questions and doubts and everything else. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I've heard, I think it was on Rob Bell's podcast, which I don't even know if he still does that. I listened to it.
Yeah, he does.
A long time ago. But he was talking about people that have kind of walked away from a fundamentalist way of thinking, fundamentalist churches, and that a lot of times, like, we'll look back and be like, how the hell could I have thought that way? Or why was I involved with that for so long? And his one piece of advice was really helpful for me, where he just said, you need to learn to forgive your former self. So, through that process, as you're like answering questions you've, never even considered before, like, you're going to get to a point where you're like, how did I think that the earth was 6,000 years old? Like, what the hell is wrong with me? Like, you're gonna get to that point, and then I think, you just have to be like, okay, that was where I was. That's not where I'm at now. And I just have to figure out how to let it go and forgive myself. So, that was really helpful for me. Thanks, Rob Bell. I don't agree with you on a lot of stuff, but that was helpful. So
awesome. Rob, man, thanks for hanging out and kind of mulling over this.
Thanks for having me on again.
Well, that's going to do it for Season 4, Episode 1 of the AxPx podcast. Hope you guys learned a little bit about Second Naïveté, and hopefully you learned a little bit more about yourself and how to kind of process some things if you're in a certain stage of your deconstruction or your faith or not. So hopefully this helped you out. You can have access to all the unedited conversations by becoming a patron. It's only $1 a month. Go to patreon.com/theAxPx. You can also check out past shows at theaxpx.com and follow on Twitter at theAxPx. I want to thank all of you for listening. Please, if you have any questions, thoughts, anything at all, please let me know. There's a contact form on the website, or just drop me a line via social media, Facebook or Twitter. All the music for this episode was composed by the Candle Park Stars. They're very generous with letting me use their music for the intro and outro and throughout the episode. Find all their music over at candleparkstars.bandcamp.com. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I'll talk to all of you next episode.